Wajay hello everybody. My name is Scott Wabano. I'm a Two-Spirit Cree from the Cree Nation of Waskaganish, born and raised in Moose Factory, Ontario, located on Treaty 9 territory. It's an honor to be here with the Two Spirits in Motion Society, Two Sims, to film a masterclass on fashion branding. But before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and my journey in fashion and how I got to where I am today. I guess my journey in fashion was a little bit different. Growing up Indigenous in an isolated community, specifically in a northern community, you're not really exposed to mainstream fashion the way a place like Toronto or Montreal or New York or LA is, for example. So my first impressions and my first exposure to fashion was always around ceremony and powwow, and really just talking about the powers that Indigenous fashion truly has and how we use fashion every day as a tool to educate people about our stories, our family lineages, our histories as Indigenous people, and something that always gravitated towards me. And I grew up in Moose Factory where it was super isolated. However, we did have a magazine stand there. And one of my favorite childhood memories was always going to the store with my mom and spending time at that magazine stand, magazine rack where it had People, Fashion, all of these different magazines. And I would always just stand there while my mom was grocery shopping, just going through these magazines and really just admiring high fashion, and just really got an appreciation for this fashion and mainstream fashion, and was always wondering too, like, why wasn't Indigenous people in these magazines? Whenever I went to ceremony and whenever I went to powwows or community gatherings, Indigenous people, we were always just decked out. We were always decked out in our ribbon skirts, our regalia, our beadwork, our everything. It always just put a question in my mind, like, why aren't we on the same platform as all of these other fashion designers? Our fashion is slow fashion, it's sustainable fashion, it's meaningful fashion, and it's fashion that tells a story. Something that really hits all the check marks that the fashion industry is really looking for. From that young age, it really just kind of ingrained a love for fashion for me, and really just made me have an appreciation for fashion, even though I was growing up in a res where people didn't really have that same appreciation for fashion as much as I did. So when I went to school, when I was in elementary school, I was getting bullied a lot. I was a very feminine child. I had long black hair, hung out with only girls mostly, and I was constantly getting picked on and bullied for that. And I had a really hard upbringing, because not only was I being bullied by my peers, I was also being bullied by family members and community members. The word Two-Spirit wasn't really a word that we heard in our community, and it wasn't an identity that we kind of knew about or honored or respected, just due to the colonization that really happened in our communities. I come from two residential school survivor parents. My mom actually went to Bishop Horton Hall in Moose Factory, and my dad went to St. Anne's Residential School in Fort Albany, Ontario. And anybody who knows the histories about, residential schools and the amount of trauma it brought to our people, you would also know that St. Anne's Residential School was one of the most horrific residential schools in Canada. It was actually the home of the electric chair. Unfortunately, my great-grandma had to send a lot of my great aunts and uncles and my grandparents to that school. And unfortunately, not all of her children returned back from that school. So we dealt with a lot of intergenerational trauma, I guess you could say. And from that, my family actually grew into devoted Catholics, and that's kind of how I was raised. With my dad's side of the family. On my mom's side, we were always going to ceremonies, powwows, that was me and my mom's thing. But on my dad's side, I was going to Sunday school. I was going to church camps and camp meetings, and really just hearing about the Lord and our Savior and Jesus Christ and all that. And it was really interesting to kind of grow up that way, to really see these two opposite kind of lifestyles, but I also got to see the kind of spiritual warfare that was happening within our communities. There was such a strong division between traditional Indigenous folks and Indigenous folk who wanted to go to church and Catholicism. And I think that's also what affected a lot of the lateral violence within my community, and the reason why a lot of youth like myself who were into ceremony and into culture and into powwow dancing had to deal with a lot of the bullying and, like I said, the lateral violence that came with it. But I truly believe that we're all meant to go through things because they really do shape us into who we are. I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't go through what I went through and kind of experience the lifestyle that I did, because it really did give me an appreciation for not only like our ceremonies and our traditional ways of life, but gave me an appreciation for people who choose to go a different route, and follow the church or the Bible or any other religion that they deem is kind of necessary for their healing journey, and that's something my grandparents really ingrained in me, and something I always remember, from a very young age was, why wasn't my grandparents like disowning me? Like, why didn't they hate me for following the traditional ways of life? When in reality, I remember my grandpa saying, like, who are we to interfere with your healing journey? We are here to kind of stand by you and be by your side. And whatever you choose to do, we're just here to respect you and to honor you and to love you, despite what path you may follow. And that's something that I really hold close to my heart. One of the many teachings that I received as a child was really just leading with an open mind and an open heart, and leading with love, especially because I always truly believe that love extinguishes the hate. And I was really blessed and very privileged to be raised that way. And that's something that I still really carry throughout my life. And when it came to fashion, fashion has just always been a part of my family and our culture and everything that we do, from a very young age, going hunting and going out into land and just going camping and harvesting our moose harvest and goose harvest every year. I remember my grandma, before she passed away, was always in the living room, sewing so many gloves and bags and mittens and moccasins. And I just remember like the living room always just smelled like moose hide. And every time I smell moose hide now, it always reminds me of my grandma. And my grandma passed away when I was a very young age, but something that I always remember her doing was practicing her crafts and doing that sewing and putting that love and that blessing into each craft that she made. It was always for either our family, or it was also during the time when Moose Factory had a lot of tourists come up. So every summer, it was called tourist season in Moosonee and Moose Factory. We'd get a group of tourists who would come from all across the world just to come and experience Moose Factory, to come on a train, because it's a very isolated community. You have to take a 5-hour train ride from Cochrane to the town, and then you have to take a boat or a helicopter or a ski-doo, or if there's an ice road, you could drive over. So people really wanted to experience how, I guess, isolating it was up there. And a part of our family's start in entrepreneurship was, selling our crafts down by the bay to all these different tourists. They really wanted to come and experience Indigenous culture, and we had that privilege of being able to share our Indigenous culture with them through the use of mittens and moccasins and bags and different types of beadwork. And that's something that was kind of ingrained in me at a very young age, and something that I remember even before that, during the Hudson's Bay Trading Post days. My great-grandma actually had to migrate from the Attawabascat region down to Moosonee in order to seek better work. And that's also another reason why she did that, was because she made crafts, she made dream catchers, she made moccasins, and she made all of these different materials that she was selling and kind of making a living off of, and being able to provide for her family, because my great-grandma had over 12 kids, and feeding 12 mouths is definitely not cheap. And so my grandparents had to really find out different ways to support our family, and through entrepreneurship, they were able to sell fashion and sell their stories, and that's something that was really ingrained at me at a very young age. Growing up, I wasn't always in fashion. It took me a little time to really find out what my true passion was, even though I knew I enjoyed fashion at a very young age and kind of used it as a shield, I guess you could say, in my early high school days, because no matter what, people can bully me as much as they want, but they couldn't look as good as me. That was my whole mindset, and I really thought of fashion as a way to kind of send out a message, but also give out that first impression to people, that I enjoy what I do, I like fashion, and people really underestimate putting together a powerful outfit and the confidence and the self-esteem and how it helps with that. And growing up as a two-spirit in the closet kid in high school, I needed a shield. I needed something to shelter me. And for me, fashion was that tool that I used in a lot of my life. But growing up in the res, like after I moved back to the res, that's when I faced bullying a lot again. Because like I mentioned, there's not really much fashion happening in the res. And when you're wearing all of these nice clothes or wanting to wear this nice outfit that makes you feel good, obviously there's going to be people who are going to be there and be like, oh, they think they're better, or look at them, they just think they're good all the time. Like that was the type of conversations I grew up hearing all the time, when in reality I just liked what I was wearing. I liked an outfit. It gave me confidence and made me feel good. It wasn't about impressing anybody. It was more about how I felt inside. And that was when I realized the true power of fashion and how it could really change an individual's perception and change a person's confidence over time. And I really just wanted to bring that appreciation of fashion back to the communities, back to the res, because I strongly believe that we are all a part of the fashion industry. Whether you're actively working in the industry or not, each of us has a role. Whether you're a designer, a stylist, or a consumer of fashion, you have an impact that you leave behind whenever you're in the fashion industry. And it's really important to remember to leave a good impact. Not much people know that the fashion industry right now is the second most polluting industry in the world. And that's underneath oil. But everybody is a part of the fashion industry, because every day when we wake up, the first thought we think of is, what am I going to wear today? And that is when you make that conscious decision on what type of brands you're going to be supporting, how sustainable is that brand, and really looking at the impact that you may be causing the world with your clothes. And not really much people think about that. And it wasn't until I started studying and getting more into fashion was when I realized, like we all have an impact and we all have a choice, and we all make a choice every day on what type of brands we're going to support and what type of impact we're going to leave behind. So yeah, like I mentioned, I wasn't always into fashion. I was in high school, I did have an appreciation for it, but I wasn't really considering it as a career at that point. And, during that time, I was also heavily in the closet. And I wasn't really doing anything to try and put a target on my back, because being gay back in the day wasn't as cool as it is today, I guess you could say. I knew I would face a lot of harassment and bullying and violence if I came out. So as a way, I really shielded a lot of my passions and didn't even act on a lot of my passions in high school, unfortunately. And I remember growing up in the res in Moosonee, going to high school there, and we had a fashion class there. And I remember being really interested in taking it, and really wanting to take it, and just like knowing that's where my passion was. But unfortunately, I was so in my head and dealing with my own identity that I decided to put that aside. I was like, I'm not going to actually take fashion, because it's all girls in that class, and it's obviously I'm just going to be another target, going to be bullied a lot, what are people going to think of me, all of that stuff that you think in high school. And now that I reflect back on it, I feel a little sad for myself, unfortunately. I feel sad that I didn't take the opportunities that were available for me just because I was scared of what other people thought. If there's something that I could change, it would definitely be that, because I always reflect back on what would have happened if I did decide to take fashion. What would have happened if I decided to take that fashion program and decided to go right into fashion after high school? Like, how different would my life would have been? But I also believe that you shouldn't live with regrets, because I was able to find my true passion through trial and error. Once I graduated high school in Moosonee, I thought I wanted to be in music. And I decided to go to school for music industry arts in Ottawa, and I lived there for about 2 years. I really had that whole mindset that I was going to be a music producer or a DJ, and that's where I wanted my path to go. But even when I was studying music and, doing my music thing, I was always telling people, like, I can't wait to design merch. I can't wait to design all of the different merch that's going to be underneath my brand, because my merch is going to be different. It's not just going to be like these usual t-shirts and everything. Like, I want to do fun things with my merch. And even when I was in music, I was still thinking about designing. I was still thinking about fashion and how I was going to incorporate that within my music. And then fast forward to my music, I realized that's not what I wanted to do. I actually decided to drop out of my music program. I decided that I wanted to do something else, even though I still wanted to be in the industry, but I also wanted to do my own thing and not kind of fall under these rules of other people. So I decided to go into radio broadcasting because I was like, you know what? I'm going to create my own radio station. And even when I was in radio broadcasting and doing all my different promotions, what was always at the back of my mind? It was fashion. And how am I going to use fashion on my radio station to change the way people look at radio stations, really bring a different vibe to radio stations. I wanted to do video. So what podcasts are doing now, video and audio, I always had that dream of mine to do that, but also incorporating fashion in a way to kind of tell that story through the use of audio and visual components. Like I mentioned, fashion has just always been on the side of my mind, at the back of my mind in whatever I decided to do. And then unfortunately, during this whole time, I was still not even out of the closet. I was still struggling with my identity. I was still trying to perceive being a straight man, and then I really fell into a dark hole. And this was after I finished my radio broadcasting program. It was the summer of 2016, and I always remember that because everyone always branded as summer of 2016 was the best summer of my life. That's when Drake dropped his Views album. It was that summer. And I remember everyone was just having the greatest summer of their life. But I was struggling with my identity, and I ended up falling into alcoholism and drug addiction, unfortunately. I got really bad into my meth addiction the summer of 2016 and was really into it for a couple months, and it really, really impacted my life a lot, like personally and professionally, because I was also working a job David's Tea during that time, serving people tea and, really just kind of using that as my income to kind of fuel my passion. But because I was showing up to work high on drugs every day, eventually that led me to losing my job. And then I lost my job, was on welfare for a bit in North Bay, kind of in this dark hole, not knowing what to do and just doing drugs every single day. And I remember I was on a bender during this time. I think it was my 4th day up. And I went outside. I always share this in all of my different presentations. I actually have a photo as well that I could share. And it was about 4 a.m., 5 a.m. I remember looking up at the sky and it was just pink. It was just red, orange, pink, like I'd never seen the sky look like that before. And I remember just feeling so amazed and just so in awe and just feeling like, damn, like Mother Nature is so fucking beautiful. And she really does just provide beauty for us that we don't really appreciate, And then that led to me being like, okay, so what am I doing? Like, why am I just throwing my life away right now? Why am I going down this same route that I've seen a lot of my friends and family members go down? And, unfortunately, not a lot of them made it out alive. I've lost so many friends to drug addiction and to suicide and to alcoholism. I lost so many family members to drug addiction and alcoholism. That was like my before and after moment, I guess you could say. That was the moment where I realized, like, hey, this is no longer serving me. Life is too short. Why aren't we doing the things that we love? Why aren't we doing the things that bring us happiness and passion and things that just make us want to get up in the morning, And that's when I was like, hey, I'm done with this lifestyle now. And I remember I flushed all my drugs down the toilet that morning. And I was reflecting on it. I was like packing up my stuff. I didn't even know where I was going. I was just packing up everything. And then I called my mom. And God bless my mom, because if my mom wasn't there in that moment, I don't know where I would have been. Thank God she answered, and I just remember crying to her and just telling her, I'm so tired of this life. Like, I want to heal, I want to do better, I want to be better. I ended up coming out to the closet to my mom and really just had like a special moment with her. And my mom was actually the only person I've ever came out to, because I grew up with a single mother. Me and my mom's relationship is like this, and she's like the one person that that I kind of live my life for, you know. She's the one person that I love and like really just has been there for me through thick and thin, and she was really the only opinion that I really cared about when it came to my two-spirit identity and me coming out as a gay person. That was the only reason why I came out to her, was because she was the only one who mattered in my opinion. And luckily, when I did come out with her, you know, she showed me love and she showed me understanding and she showed me acceptance. And that's something that I really want to bring not only within my life, but within fashion as well, too. So I ended up leaving North Bay during that time and I moved back to Waskaganish with my mom and got clean and sober. I don't want to say completely sober, but I stopped doing all my hard drugs. Stopped doing all the things that were really affecting my growth as a person, and decided that I wanted to do better. And from there, that's when I started working within community. I was working as a youth community planner for the Cree Nation of Waskaganish for about a year. And just planning different events for all of the youth, you know, and really just bringing that passion back to my life that I lost due to drugs. And really just reminding myself who we do that work for. And that is when I started growing an even stronger passion and admiration for youth advocacy work, you know, and starting to work for specifically 2S LGBTQ youth living within isolated communities, because people don't really understand the impacts of residential schools, and people don't really understand how hard it is to be gay in a northern community. It's not accepting as it would be if you were in Toronto or a rural city like Montreal or Vancouver or even Winnipeg for that matter, you know. Like, it was very hard, and I knew a lot of my friends were struggling to come out of the closet just because of all of the conversations we were hearing. And that really just gave me that drive and that motivation and that passion to kind of bring change to my communities and really just remind youth, you know, that it's okay to be gay. You know, there's a power in that, you know, and really tapping into that and really embracing your two-spirit identity, and really just wanted to be a living example to other 2S LGBTQ youth who may be living in northern communities, and just wanted to be that representation I needed to see growing up. And I always think of the young 2S LGBTQ youth out there who are living in isolated communities and northern communities and feeling like they have nobody to turn to, or feeling like they can't go after their passion because they're scared of what other people think, or they don't even have that support from their family and community, you know. And I just want to remind those youth that you do have that support. Whether it's from me or from other strangers on the internet, just know that there is support out there for you. And there's people who want to see you succeed and want to see you chase your dreams and will help you and assist you in doing that. And that's something that I really want to do with my life, is really helping all these youth who dream of being into fashion, dream of modeling on high fashion runways, or dream of doing makeup backstage for New York Fashion Week. You know, there's so many different roles within fashion, and I know a lot of Indigenous youth would like to see themselves in that. So the work that I do really just is all for them. And really, I just remind myself, you know, that the doors don't need to be open for me. They need to be open for other young Indigenous folk out there who want to be in fashion. So, how did I get started into fashion, and when did I kind of make that decision for myself? It wasn't until after, you know, I kind of started learning more about myself after my drug addiction and coming out of the closet as a two-spirit person, and started surrounding myself with individuals that I could learn from and individuals that inspired me. And I truly believe that's something that you need to do in this lifetime, you know, is to have people around you that inspire you and motivate you to be a better person. And I'm very privileged and very blessed to have people in my life that do that, because I feel like growing up in the res for the longest time, I always just surrounded myself with people who just drained me and who bullied me and would always come up with excuses like, oh, they're my cousin, or oh, they're family, you know, or oh, I grew up with them, you know, and constantly just making up these excuses for them and not really taking that time for myself to kind of cut them off so I could grow my wings in a way where people are not battering onto me. I'm happy I did that. It was a hard thing to do, like, not gonna lie, like having to tell your cousins that you don't want to hang out with them anymore because they're not good for your mental health. That's a really hard conversation to have, and not a lot of people want to hear that they're being cut off by their close cousin. So dealing with that was definitely the hardest, but it was also the most rewarding thing that I could have done, because that allowed me to focus more on myself, my passion, and my dreams and my goals and my aspirations in life. After I realized, that the world was our oyster as an Indigenous person, that's when I decided that I was going to do something with my life. During that time, I was very heavily into mainstream fashion, like Dior, Givenchy, like Off-White. All of these different brands were just so intriguing to me. And during that time, that was also when we started getting our first Black creative directors in all these major fashion houses. And I really want to attribute that to Virgil Abloh, who was one of my biggest inspirations growing up, because he was the first Black director of Louis Vuitton and really showed that, other marginalized folks in the industry, that they too could achieve their dreams, that they too could achieve a creative director role within a major fashion house that nobody's ever seen before. And that really opened my eyes and made me realize, the industry is ready to embrace diversity. It is ready to include all of these folks. It's definitely been a long time coming, but we're here and we're ready to kind of embrace that. So I seen it as a chance for me to kind of enter in, and I was living in Waskaganish at the time too. I was living in such an isolated community. I was like, okay, like, how am I going to do this? Like, where am I going to go? How am I going to start? I actually applied for a school in Montreal, Quebec. That was my first options. I applied to the LaSalle College there in fashion design, and anybody who knows fashion within Canada, you would know that LaSalle College is one of the top colleges in the country. It's a private college, and unfortunately my sponsorship, my band, didn't cover going into private colleges. So fortunately I couldn't go to LaSalle College, but my second option was actually going to Toronto at Humber College for Fashion Arts and Business. And boy, once I got that acceptance letter, that is when a shift in my life happened. And that's when I realized, following your passion is truly what's gonna make you want to get up in the morning. And that's what happened to me after I got that first acceptance letter. That's when my life kind of changed, and I knew what I had to do, and I knew the work that I needed to do, and I knew it wasn't going to be easy, because during that time there was not much Indigenous folks within the industry. People were barely talking about Indigenous fashion. I think Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto was just starting up. I seen this as a shift, and I seen this as that perfect opportunity, like, okay, now is our time as Indigenous folk to enter into this industry and to remind people, that our fashion has always been here and has always been meaningful and has always been sustainable. Yeah, I'm just happy that I got accepted. So going to a big city from a really isolated community was a journey. It was definitely something I needed to learn how to adapt to, and it's definitely not for everyone. The amount of times I have left my community to try and live in the city has always been tough for me. Leaving your culture, leaving your family, leaving your community, leaving basically everything that you know. It's a shock. It's like a shift, and it's definitely something that you have to learn to adjust to. And at the time when I moved to Toronto for the first time, I knew I wasn't ready. I actually moved back to the res back in 2017 because I knew I wasn't ready to be in Toronto. And I just longed for community, and I just longed for, being around my people and being around my culture. So I moved back to Waskaganish, and I really kind of built that self-esteem and that confidence within myself during that time to kind of, build that strength for me to move, because I knew it was going to be hard. Leaving everything that you know and leaving everything that you grew up with is hard. But it's also, I feel like, essential in life sometimes in order to grow as a person. But also reminding yourself that you're not leaving all of that for good. You're leaving everything for a moment to better yourself, to better your career, and to chase after those goals and dreams and aspirations you've had as a child. You always got to remember that you are your own person. You have your own dreams and goals that you need to fulfill. It's really important to act on that, but also not be scared of that, you know? And I'm not trying to say like you're not going to struggle, because I struggled a lot moving from the res to Toronto. I missed my community. I missed being around people who just understood my humor. But I also knew that there was other Indigenous folk in the city who were probably feeling that same exact feeling as I would. So I made it my mission when I moved to Toronto to really access all of the services that were available for Indigenous folks like myself. You know, I started going to the Indigenous Center, the Indigenous Student Lounge within Humber. And that is what really helped me get through a lot of hard times. Because sometimes you just need your community. And luckily, I found that community living in Toronto, going to these different Native lounges, going to these different Native events, you know. I was very shy as well, you know. To think about talking to someone new and introducing to myself to somebody, that was like hard for me, you know. I stuttered, I didn't want to talk, I was very introverted, but I kind of knew that it wasn't going to get me anywhere if I was just going to stay to myself and stay quiet, you know. I truly believe that beautiful things happen when you push yourself out of your comfort zone, even if it's just saying hi or a wave or just a smile to somebody, you know, like that is what helped me kind of gain that confidence. You know, I really just kind of pushed myself to the limits, I guess you could say, you know, and really just wanting to find that community and wanting to be around community and wanting to just support my community. You know, I needed to put in that same energy and really just do that for myself. So once I moved to Toronto, you know, and started finding my community and really just attending all of these Indigenous events and really just got a group of friends going on, I felt like I was able to do anything after that. You know, I felt like I was able to just achieve anything, because no matter what, I still had the support from community and my friends, and I still had that love, you know. Even if I failed, they still loved me. And that's something that I really was grateful for, because after that, I was able to go to many different fashion events in Toronto. You know, like I had this mission, you know, I wanted to be in the fashion industry. And I didn't want to just be in this niche market, you know, where it's just serving a little bit people. Like I wanted to be front and center in the fashion industry where everybody wants to be, kind of, I guess you could say. So I made it my mission to just insert myself into a lot of these fashion events, you know, and oftentimes I was always the only Indigenous folk in this room, you know, and people were shocked that Indigenous person was there. Like I was even shocked at hearing some of the conversations or hearing some of the questions people had. You know, like, oh, I didn't know Indigenous people still existed. Like, oh, like, you don't look Indigenous, you're not dressed Indigenous, you know, as I'm wearing like a Balmain blazer or something, you know, and I'm like, no, like Indigenous people like fashion too. You know, just because we're Indigenous doesn't make us exempt from appreciating stuff in the fashion industry. And I always ingrained that, you know, I always reminded people that we're here, you know, we're just like everybody else, you know, we have our interests, we have our likes, and for me, that's fashion. And I know a lot of other Indigenous folks that have that same appreciation and love for fashion the same way I do. So when I was entering into these rooms and oftentimes being the only Indigenous person, of course there was imposter syndrome that would kick in, you know, and ask myself, like, what am I doing here? I'm the only Indigenous person here. Like, why am I here? I shouldn't be here. All really just getting into my head and trying to second guess myself and psych myself out and being like, no, you need to leave now. Like doing stuff like that. So I had to fight really that inner voice in my head and reminding myself like, no, I deserve to be here. There's a reason why I'm here. And I always truly believe that Creator wouldn't put you in the rooms that you are in if you weren't meant to be in them. You know, sometimes you're there to shake things up. Sometimes you're there to open up some minds. And that is what I stuck to. You know, I always just reminded myself, there's a reason why I'm here. And really just asking myself, why am I here? Because I'm here to open up doors for more Indigenous youth to walk in. I don't want Indigenous youth to walk into a fashion event and be like, question themselves the same way I did. You know, I want them to walk in and knowing that they deserve to be there and that they're honored to be there and that their presence is valued there. Because for a long time it wasn't. And it wasn't that we were underrepresented. It's that we're systemically excluded from a lot of these places. And I truly believe that Indigenous people have been excluded from the fashion industry for a long time because we have so many sustainable alternative methods of fashion that could really change the way people look at the fashion industry and really change the way it affects Mother Nature. And I think now is the time for us to really just reclaim our roles and reclaim our spaces within fashion because it's about damn time. I think that's it. Yeah.
Perfect.